This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Brainiac in the pre-crisis era is Wearing the Cape cosplayer and returning guest, Daniel Sanchez. Welcome to 2026.
Wow, thank you for having me as your first guest this year, and I hope that my appearance here will be good for your programmed audience.
Yes. This is the first episode of the new year, the 6th year of Digging for Kryptonite. And I've wanted to do a multi-episode look at other villains, especially Brainiac, ever since we gave Lex Luthor the similar treatment a few years ago. And it certainly felt timely to cover Brainiac now, given that we know he is going to be appearing in James Gunn's Man of Tomorrow movie in 2027. We recently had casting news. I can probably guess the answer, Daniel, but is this something that you are excited for, looking forward to?
Absolutely. I'm one of those fans who loves Lex Luthor, but I'm glad to see the Lex Luthor streak ending, that we get a truly worthy other than Lex villain. And especially either you know the history already or you'll learn it today and in your future episodes. But the possibility that there would either be a Lex Superman team up against Brainiac or a Lex Brainiac team up against Superman, either one excites me. And I think hopefully our discussion today will generate that seed in everyone else too. But there's no wrong way to go by bringing in Brainiac.
There are a lot of different ways to go, and that's going to be a big part of our discussion this week and the episodes to come. But you mentioned being excited to finally have a villain on the big screen other than Lex. Of course, we've had Zod and some others along the way, but Lex is definitely very well represented in Superman's big screen outings. And this prompts a question from one of our patrons to help get the ball rolling here. So this is from Jan, who says, Brainiac is arguably Superman's biggest nemesis outside of Lex Luthor, and yet he gets none of the respect in other media and often in the comics themselves. Why is that? Why is he just less sticky? And the one thing I would say is that as far as other media goes, in fairness, virtually all of the animated series have tackled Brainiac. And in live action, I mean, Lois and Clark didn't go down the Brainiac road unless we count Fathead or Big Head or whatever he was called in the series finale, which I wouldn't. But of course, Smallville gave us a live action Brainiac in the form of James Marsters. Krypton, good Lord. We've talked about that before and we're going to talk about it again, but gave us an absolutely incredible live action Brainiac that, as far as I'm concerned, has just set the bar for what this character can be. Superman and Lois, to their credit, the producers have said that they did have plans for Brainiac had the show continued, and they did give us a Milton Fine character in a very small role in some of the final episodes. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that front. So I feel like as far as animation and television, I feel like the character's been fairly well represented, but on the big screen, certainly not. I mean, before I opine on this question, do any thoughts come to your mind about like why it's taken this long to actually get Brainiac on the big screen?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is just the practical cost of having done it. I mean, just look at Superman 3 as your example. You know, we as fans, we all know that was intended and written to be Brainiac with a large Supergirl part as well thrown in. But the special effects effort that it would have taken to have done this space battle and the ship and Brainiac himself properly just probably wasn't there in the late 80s. And, sci-fi got it right on Krypton, but, maybe it's good that it took this long because it's, as they say, worth the wait. And we're going to get just a busting out of the gate version of Brainiac that's worthy of the writing of Jeff Johns and the writing of the team at Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I would co-sign on that. I think that the cost, the production challenge that Brainiac creates probably accounts for at least part of the reason why we haven't seen him on the big screen yet. It's interesting because, you bring up Superman 3, the original plans for that. We also know, we talked about it last year, the original plans for that unmade fifth Christopher Reeve film, Superman Reborn, would have featured Brainiac. Mm-hmm. We know that the Tim Burton, Nick Cage, Superman Lives aborted project in the late 90s would have featured Brainiac. I believe Bryan Singer had intended to use Brainiac had he done a follow-up to Superman Returns. So it's like a lot of intention to use Brainiac, right? And it seems like for whatever reason, it's not the instinct, or it's just not feasible to do it right out of the gate. But it seems like there is this interest on the part of filmmakers, and mm-hmm. for whatever reason, right, like those projects haven't come to fruition, but that there had been that idea. So yes, I'm excited to finally see this happen in a big screen movie. I also wonder, I don't know if this is really what's going on, but one of the things we'll be talking about is how the character has changed so much. And maybe all of those changes are part of it as well, that maybe it's been harder to kind of pin down this character or zero in on a specific take. I wonder if there could be something to that. But in any event, we're barreling towards the 2027 film. I have one other patron question that I want to pose to you. Big picture question. I'm going to be asking all of the guests this question, and I'll be kind of doling out my answer as we make our way forward through these episodes. This is from our pal, Rick Reason, who says, I'm really excited about this coverage and the upcoming movie. Do you have a favorite version of Brainiac? And did it change while doing the work for this podcast? For me, picking a favorite would be like asking me to choose between my kids. I have loved every iteration of the character. I have the Silver Age version of Superpowers figure in a spot of honor in my room. However, the Milton Fine version has some excellent stories as well. So this really big picture question about what our favorite iteration of the character is, do you land firmly in one camp or another at this point?
It is a bit like picking a favorite child, but I think I would have to go with the animated version.
Okay.
In the way that it was so well woven into the tapestry of Krypton and what happened and why, and the emotional conflict that Superman would have to deal with later. This is still one of the only remnants of where he came from, and yet he can't coexist with it, is so emotionally rich that I think it has that extra going for it. It transcends just your typical I'm overpowered or I'm over checkmated here intellectually, but it has that layer. So I would go with that.
So when you said the animated series, Superman, the animated series, the Kryptonian mm-hmm. AI iteration mm-hmm. from the late 90s. Gotcha. I don't want to spend too much time here because I'm going to be talking about this over multiple episodes. I guess the short answer, and I'll unpack it more as we go forward, not to be basic, but ultimately I do land in the camp of the Jeff Johns, quote unquote, one true Brainiac mm-hmm. that we got in that story from Johns and Gary Frank in the post Infinite Crisis landscape, which fused together a lot of elements of the mythology where he had been this Coluan, but with cybernetic enhancements. And he was this cold collector of information and bottler of cities, including Kandor, giving us that Krypton/Superman connection. And he could project his consciousness into other probes, other forms, which allowed us, especially by the time we get to something more recent like House of Brainiac, to see, like to literally see on the page all of these different versions of Brainiac as aspects of the one true Brainiac that had existed. So I think for me, that's where I am, especially at this point in my homework. We'll see if that shifts. I do think there is a very compelling argument for the Kryptonian AI, as you laid out. We're going to get into that more next week. I've really given this a lot of thought, and there are ultimately a couple of specific reasons why that one doesn't win the day for me. And I'll talk about it more, but I do think it is a very compelling take. And it's one of the ones I grew up with. Like I grew up with Superman, the animated series, and I grew up with post-crisis Milton Fine.
Hmm.
I wouldn't die on the hill of Milton Fine. Like I wouldn't make that strong of an argument for that version of the character, but I have so much love for that. And like I said, the Kryptonian AI, a lot more to say on that. And there's a good argument for it, but ultimately I'm going with the quote unquote one true Brainiac that Jeff Johns and Gary Frank gave us.
Yeah. And going back to your earlier question too, why do you think it took this long for Brainiac to reach the big screen and get to the wider public? It also might be that when we talk about Superman, we tend to really like Superman being human and representing the best of us. And so I think the first few stories of a new version of Superman, either a new actor or a new creative team, tend to be more human focused. It's more about Lois, it's more about Ma and Pa, it's more about Kansas, it's more about himself having a home. And it's not yet the time to have this alien cosmic level story. And so I think Lex slides in much easier in those, which is why, Zod was Superman 2, not Superman 1. So, but that being said, that means that it's a beautiful ramp up. Now we love Superman. He is us. He is our reflection. So now, we're with him as a larger, bigger threat looms.
Yeah, well said. The other thing, and this is something I've been kicking around a lot leading up to this recording here and going through all of the homework that we looked at for this episode, all of the Silver and Bronze Age stories and episodes from the Filmation cartoon and from Super Friends. It's funny doing this podcast for as long as I have. Like a lot of times, if I'm invited on another podcast, they'll introduce me as like Superman expert Anthony Desiato, and I appreciate that. And I get it. And I guess given the number of hours I have spent studying and discussing the character, sure. But I'm never quick to like grab that title because for me, this is a journey. It's an ongoing journey. And I'm always learning and filling in gaps in my fandom and kind of wrestling with opinions that I've had. And I say all of that to say, like, I'm not ashamed to admit with Brainiac in particular, and again, this is, I think, one of the main reasons I wanted to do this run of episodes. It's taken until now, I think, for me to really put all of the pieces of this character together. I mean, over these past years, yes, I've gotten the gist of Brainiac and I've experienced a lot of Brainiac stories. But I think in the back of my head, I have always had these lingering questions about like, what exactly is his deal, his true nature, his true origin, because we have gotten different versions. And so this whole idea, is he an alien, a computer in humanoid form, a computer in robot form, an alien possessing the body of a human, an alien mind inhabiting a robot, this one true version that we talked about? And ultimately the answer is yes, depending on which era that we're talking about here. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this for myself and for the audience to kind of like lay this out, because there have been these very kind of distinct iterations of the character. So, I'm excited.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were saying before is whatever permutation Brainiac takes, whatever subtlety of variation he takes, he's still the other, as opposed to Superman saving us and protecting us and being one of us. So it can sort of go decade by decade of, much like Rod Serling did. What is it that is the social fear of the time? It can be AI. Or it could be something else. But Brainiac has that chameleon ability to shift a little and represent the other that we're temporarily not sure of right now.
Absolutely. And I guess building off of that, one of the things that I really had in mind as I was going through everything is, yes, we've had these different iterations of the character across time and media. What are the constants? And what are the most salient aspects that really define the character that we would really expect to see, especially in something like the forthcoming Man of Tomorrow movie? And maybe we'll continue to answer this as we move forward, but I think at the most fundamental level for me, it's that cold, calculating nature. And whether he's an alien or he's a computer or he's AI, whatever it is, I think it's that coldness, that the other, like you were saying. But I think that's kind of at the heart of it for me. It's interesting because we don't necessarily see that from the initial stories that we're going to talk about here, where he's more kind of like full on evil space alien, and there's a little bit more fire to the character. But ultimately, we do get to the point in these stories that we looked at where we get to more of that cold nature, and that's continued moving forward. And that to me, I think, is the most kind of essential ingredient, everything else aside. I'm curious how you feel.
I would completely agree. And I think the narrative value there is that it takes something away from Superman's arsenal, which is he cannot appeal to Brainiac's better nature. There's no way to reach him in that way. You can't find the good in him as normally Superman would be able to do. One of the things that I love the most about Robert Venditti's writing in the Superman 78 books is that he was able to do that, especially in the second series. It's you don't have to believe in me, I believe in you. And he reached the the antagonist on that level. You cannot do that with Brainiac. So it forces us to go into a story path that is unpredictable and therefore interesting.
Absolutely. All right. So, in looking at these pre-crisis stories, and we talked about this off mic beforehand, but I feel like there are two major lines of demarcation that we can draw that sort of carve up three main phases of Brainiac in the Silver and Bronze Ages. So we have the initial phase of Brainiac, where he's what I like to refer to as the evil space alien. And I use that terminology specifically because I'm a huge Power Rangers fan. And by the way, now my son has been getting into it, and there's a new line of like retro style figures and games. We've been having such a ball with all of it. But that's how a lot of the action figure cases are labeled. It's like evil space alien. And that's sort of phase one of Brainiac, beginning with his debut in Action Comics 242 in 1958. And then with Superman 167 in 1964, we get the beginning of the next major phase, where we have the first Luthor Brainiac team up, but more importantly, Luthor, and by extension the reader, learn Brainiac's true nature and origin, that he's actually a computer in humanoid form. And I feel like that kicks off the second major phase. And then late in the Bronze Age, like surprisingly late in the Bronze Age, as I'm looking at all of this, we get Action 544, the Rebirth storyline, in which Brainiac's disembodied consciousness forms this new robotic body with the honeycomb brain case and the skull ship. And it's the one that gave rise to the, I think, pretty iconic Superpowers action figure. And we saw that on the Superpowers cartoon as well. Such indelible imagery that has continued, especially as we get to the one true Brainiac, who is this Kaluan, but he also has the skull ship and all of that. And it's a relatively short-lived period between that quote-unquote rebirth and then Crisis on Infinite Earths, which will then give rise to the Milton Fine iteration, which we're going to talk about next time. But I feel like those kind of represent the three major phases. Did that line up with kind of your reading experience as you were going through all of this?
It does. I mean, we started out evil space alien in 1958, and then in 64 he went to evil robot, and then in 1980, literally 22 years after his inception, he was reprogrammed by Superman in a morally questionable way to be a good robot, which was extremely short-lived because barely 14 episodes or issues later, Superman had to program him back. So a very Clockwork Orange situation went on. Now he's evil robot until he has his peyote acid trip rebirth and becomes full on cyborg Terminator, with at last a cool spaceship. We had literally gone through 25 years of Brainiac before that had happened, where his spaceship was half a ping pong ball on top of a red frisbee. And the skull ship was so mind-blowingly cool that to me, Ed Harrington just like give that man the equivalent of the Eisner just for that one character design.
I think it really speaks to his talent and to the power of the design that it is as iconic as it is, given, like I said, that relatively short span of time where it was in play. With 1983 that we get that rebirth storyline. Well, a couple of years away from Crisis. Yet, like I said, a lot of that imagery has persisted, and we often associate that with Brainiac. So yeah, absolutely iconic redesign for the character. So I guess now those are the major tent poles, right? And then now we'll dig in more specifically within each of these phases. And we will double back to the newspaper strip audience. Don't worry, we didn't forget about Ramada. We're going to get to him. But I do want to start with Action 242 in 1958, Otto Binder, Al Plastino, which was the comic book debut of Brainiac. And I guess as I was rereading this issue, because I have experienced it before, but I guess I was particularly dialed into like what was there from the start and what wasn't there from the start. And yes, we get this green skinned look and his purple outfit. Interestingly, the diodes are on his head on the cover, but not in the interiors. Did you notice that?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
We will get the diodes a few appearances later, interior, but they're not in the actual story of Action 242. But yeah, he's this attacking alien in his flying saucer with Coco, his monkey-like companion. And he's got this impenetrable force field that really keeps Superman at bay. He poses a new challenge, the greatest challenge for Superman, as it says on the cover there. He's bottling the major cities of Earth. It turns out that he had bottled Kandor, this lost Kryptonian city. It's like, not only do we get Brainiac in this issue, we also get Kandor. I mean,
Hmm.
the elements of the mythology that are being introduced here, it's absolutely astounding. And we get his motive and a little bit of his backstory as he's explaining to Coco and the audience that a plague had wiped out the population of his planet. And he's bottling these cities to repopulate his planet. Now, if we stop there, he could actually be a fairly tragic, sympathetic figure, but he's trying to repopulate the planet to rule. Obviously,
Right.
that motive and backstory, that's going to go away as we move forward a few stories later. But at the outset, that's the motivation here. And like I said before, not cold, not calculating. He's laughing at Superman. He's taunting him. It's not that more familiar dynamic that we're going to get to. But this is where we start. So I toss the ball to you, my friend. What stands out to you about this?
I think it's fascinating that in the opening, cover to this, they call Brainiac the alien of steel. So he was pitched to be the equal of the Man of Steel. And they never really went back to that description. I can only assume it's because they just wanted to have him compete. He was not yet a robot, so you couldn't even say it was because of his, you know, robot makeup. But found that interesting that just from the get-go, this was intended to be you've had Lex Luthor, but now here's a real ongoing challenge for him. The things that, really stuck, obviously, is just this maniacal desire to always be on top. So he was forever going on about his 12th level intelligence. He was, forever talking about ruling. The purpose of these cities was for him to be an emperor and rule above them. So that this idea of always being above and always being in control is that aspect that I think was there from the beginning that Jeff Johns kind of looped back on later of you are so focused on having total control that will ultimately be the thing that brings you down. But just the power belt with what he called his ultra shell, his force field, some of those just charming Silver Age elements that were there. Coco basically existed for exposition purposes so that he would have someone to explain his evil plot to that we could follow along with. Um, by the way, side note, I did want to know whatever happened to Coco. And the truth is, it depends which path you go down for him. One, he meets his eventual demise, and Lex talks to his skeleton. I mean, not Lex, excuse me. Brainiac talks to his skeleton as sort of Horatio figure. And in another one, he ended up where he just sort of dissipated from the story. But I think he was just dropped as a character.
Yeah, on the note of Coco, though, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank would give us a more intimidating interpretation of the character in that Brainiac arc. So we did get a call back to Coco in the modern era. But yeah, I mean, I echo all of that, and I think more than anything here, even though we're not in the cold calculating territory yet, the challenge that Brainiac represents, that this is a more formidable opponent than Superman has experienced before. I think that's something that really stands out, and that carries forward here. Like I said, the Kandor bit, and we did a whole episode on Kandor, so we don't have to focus on that per se here. But it's almost an afterthought in this that there's also this bottled city of his homeworld, and of course, Superman ultimately ends up in the bottle city of Kandor, and like the first person he runs into turns out to be Jor-El's old college roommate. It's like, whoa, what a coincidence! But you know, it works, right? And I think maybe this is a good segue to the newspaper strip that ran from April to August 1958, and this was written by Alvin Schwartz, and it was another take on the super duel in space, where we have Ramado instead of Brainiac. Now, according to Wikipedia, and I've run into this idea before, I think kind of the conventional wisdom is that they would often use the newspaper strip as somewhat of a testing ground for new ideas, characters, and concepts before they made their way into the comic book page. I don't know that would have exactly been feasible in this instance. I mean, these strips are running from April to August 58. Action 242 came out July 1958 and obviously had to be produced, well enough in advance. So I don't know. I don't know if the timing quite works out where they could have actually gauged feedback and made changes in the comic book during this short period of time. But whether it was that or it was just sort of an idea that's going to be exploited in two different ways, either way, we end up with Ramado. Had you ever encountered this proto version of Brainiac before?
Not before preparing for the podcast, no, but I found it really intriguing how much more of a mature story they could get with the longer time frame of a daily newspaper strip. There were some cheesy Silver Age elements in the comic that they addressed very well in that daily strip. So, plus the art by Kurt Swan. So, I wonder how many other times that happened that we got sort of a parallel version of a story. But there were still some great seeds to what would later become the canon that we love.
Yeah, so I didn't find the full run of strips, but there was a message board. I had sent you the link that had a good number of excerpts along with commentary about those Ramado strips. And from what we could read, as well as the commentary, yeah, you're spot on. I think, given the fact that they had more time to invest in this, and we're aiming this, I think, for not just an audience of kids, because you would be having adults reading the newspaper as well. A little bit more developed and sophisticated, and they spent a lot more time explaining how Clark and Lois are on this spaceship, right? All that business, and coming up with a reasonable excuse for Clark to leave the spaceship so that he could change to Superman. A lot more time was spent with that. There was a lot more time with Superman in Kandor, and he ended up having this start to a romance with a dead ringer for Lois Lane. So I think there was a lot more going on that front. And even there, in the comic book, he randomly finds himself in Kandor because he's been miniaturized and he's on Brainiac's ship and he's trying to escape being swatted, and he just kind of happens to go into that bottle that turns out to be Kandor. Whereas in the comic strip, there's more of a back and forth with Superman and Ramado. There's a physical battle, then they play chess. Ramado loses, but he's a sore loser. He won't accept defeat. So he purposely places Superman in the bottle city of Kandor because he knows he's a Kryptonian. So a lot less contrived on that front, at least.
Yeah, and that actually was one of my favorite parts of the daily strip was that chess match. because the rules of that match were every piece on the board represented a city. So if Superman lost a piece, he lost a city of Earth. What a great way to raise the stakes of what on the surface is just Magneto and Xavier having a conversation over a chessboard. No, that is not what this was. He was playing with Paris. He was playing with London. And when in the end he won, he was still down by two cities, but the Brainiac equivalent here decided to be petty and not give them back, and hence then comes the betrayal and so on. But that tension that was written in there, I thought was super well done.
Yeah, yeah. So it was definitely fascinating to look at, and so in the strip, it's not called Kandor; it's Dor Elva. So we
Mhm.
didn't have the Kandor name yet, but I guess the last thing on that note, kind of talking about these core ingredients. Like I said, the cold calculating nature, which isn't here yet, but we'll get to it. That's a must for me. But the other big thing is a connection to Krypton in some way, shape, or form for Brainiac to have. I do think that's important, and that's something that we can achieve through him having bottled the city of Kandor or Dorelva, or something that we can achieve through the Kryptonian AI angle, right? That's another way to go. But either way, I do think that's important. And not to bag on Milton Fine, I'm going to talk about him more when we get there, but there's an instance where you don't really have that Kryptonian connection. And I think you lose a little bit of something. So again, at the start here, there's a lot more that's going to be added to the character, but there's a lot that will persist. So, a lot on the board here right from the jump. Oh, this was one other thing that I wanted to mention. I actually saw this DC.com just had an article about Brainiac and his evolution, and they talked about how Otto Binder came up with the name Brainiac, and that it was named after, the acronym is ENIAC, which stands for the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator, which was the first programmable computer created in 1945. So that was apparently the inspiration for the name Brainiac. So I hadn't come across that before, so I was just interested by that.
Yeah, that is part of legend. Also, he's mentioned that it was the combination of brain and maniac. And it was one of those great stories where two parallel creative efforts were going on at the same time. And there was a computer being built uh, with the same name, unbeknownst to Otto Binder, which led to its own interesting story.
We'll get to that when we get to Superman 167. And yeah, that's a wild piece here, especially when you consider what a major shift it precipitated in the comic book
Mhm.
origin and characterization. But we'll we'll get to that.
I do want to say I was completely fascinated, and I had to triple and quadruple check this fact, is that the term Brainiac was not used in popular culture until the creation of this comic book character. So all of those kids, in sort of the Stand By Me plus era, who would call each other Brainiac as a sarcastic way of saying you idiot, was because Otto Binder created this character.
There you go. There you go.
And the definition to this day of a brainiac is a very intelligent and usually studious, erudite person.
Yeah, there you go.
So he added to the vernacular of the English language in the same issue that he created Kandor.
Yeah, well, it's wild, absolutely wild. And so as we move forward here, it's funny, when we were talking off mic, you asked me if the list that I had put together represented all of Brainiac's comic book appearances, and I was like, no. And we talked about this as far as kind of how we landed on the list that we looked at. It was a combination of Wikipedia, insert the Michael Scott quote that I talk about all the time, as well as the Superman versus Brainiac trade paperback. Fairly limited in the grand scheme of things, but it was somewhat helpful. And then there was also a website or a message board post of someone who was going on their own Brainiac reading journey, and they laid out a lot of kind of key beats. So I kind of was cross-referencing those sources and my own knowledge and scouring the app and all of that to come up with the list that we landed on. So as is often the case when we do these sorts of episodes, the list that we looked at is meant to be robust, not necessarily exhaustive. So these are certainly not all of Brainiac's appearances, but I do think we generally hit on the most essential or interesting ones, and especially you and I were talking about this, when you kind of put them all together, a lot of times we'll end one issue, Brainiac's in one place. The next issue on our list, we'll pick up from that same place. So I think overall we got a fairly kind of cohesive narrative, even with the specific selection of issues that we looked at. And so the next one on this one, maybe more of a footnote, but Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane, number 17 from 1960. This is the Lana Lang Superwoman story, where Superman inexplicably gives Lana and then Lois powers through a blood transfusion over the course of the issue. And we find out at the end, he did this to beat Brainiac's challenge. Brainiac had returned and threatened to blow up the Earth unless Superman allowed Lois and Lana to be lured by mental command into this mine to be subjected to a blast. And Superman couldn't warn them, and he had to be off Earth at the time. But if they somehow survived, Brainiac would spare the Earth. And so that's why Superman, without explanation, gave them powers over the course of the issue so that they could survive. My favorite thing, Brainiac's only in it for a couple of pages at the end, but my favorite part is towards the end when he's explaining all of this to Lois and Lana. And they're like, how is Brainiac around? Because the way Action 242 ends is Brainiac is in suspended animation on his flying saucer, and he's going to be in that state for like centuries. And so they ask him about this in Lois Lane 17. It's like, how did he come back? I thought he was sleeping on a ship. And Superman's like, well, let me explain. I'll resume my story. And he resumes his story and never explains it.
Nope.
Amazing. Amazing.
And we can, peel back this layer as we dig more into it. But there were so many times where the disposal of Brainiac as he gets his comeuppance at the end of a story is so piss poor and so poorly thought out that it's beneath Superman as a solution of what to do with Brainiac. And, you could say, sure, well, we, can't have an ongoing story if he finds this perfect way to deal with Brainiac right away. But it does eventually reach the point where Brainiac's scale of crimes reached the point where, had at any time Superman dealt with him better, it would not have come to that. And in my reading of these in order, there were so many of those where ultimately Brainiac has now become his Joker of, if I had just dealt with you, there were entire worlds that would not be dead.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good segue. You mentioned the scale of Brainiac's crimes, because in Action Comics 275 from 1961, The Menace of Red-Green Kryptonite, Brainiac's stealing aluminum from Earth because it's valuable on whatever world he's currently dealing with, which again is just given our current conception of Brainiac, who he is, what he's all about. It's like, this guy stealing aluminum? Like this is his whole thing. This is also the issue where we get the diodes on his head for the first time. So an iconic part of his look now cemented here. But he's stealing the aluminum, and as the title suggests, and always of particular interest to the host of Digging for Kryptonite and the many shades of Kryptonite, Brainiac hits Superman with a combo red-green kryptonite ray. And Superman realizes what's happening, but he doesn't let on to the people around him or to the reader. Instead, throughout this issue, this was amazing. I had a ball with this issue. He dons a series of ridiculous hats. Becomes known as the Mad Hatter of Metropolis. It becomes, the reader learns that, he's doing this to deflect from the real effect of the red-green kryptonite, which remains a mystery until the end. But in order to kind of put on the show for the people of Metropolis, like, this is how he's been affected. He's become the Mad Hatter. He's donning all of these hats. And when he wears these hats, he must act and perform saves in a manner in accordance with someone who would be wearing that hat. So he puts on a turban and then uses a glass sphere to melt icebergs to save a fleet of ships or whatever the case may be. And at the very end, it turns out he's wearing these hats to hide the real effect of the red-green kryptonite, which was to give him a third eye. But the third eye enhances his heat vision ability such that he's finally able to generate enough force to penetrate Brainiac's force field and defeat him. I love this issue. This might be my favorite one that we looked at.
Oh my gosh. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a more Silver Age story than this one, because part of his excuse was, well, I had to keep wearing hats because if Clark Kent also had that third eye, my jig is up, you know. But also, this is the issue where Brainiac not only had a force field, but it could generate an arm and a hand with fingers and reach out and grab things. And then those fingers could have little torches that could then, shoot heat and melt things and cut them so he could grab them. And wow, that's quite a new feature for his force field. And really, this is, what does the writer need on this page? You can have it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I feel like this is an addition at this point, unless I miss something, but the craft that Brainiac flies around in is a space and time machine, because at the end of this, Superman sends Brainiac to the distant past. So there's that component here as well. But we talked about this off mic, and I talk about this on mic all the time. Like even a few years ago, and definitely going back to the time when I was kicking around at, my comic shop and everything, it's like an issue like this, I would have read it and I would have been like, this is ridiculous. I wouldn't have liked it. But now, like I said, I just had a great time with it. And I know I say this all the time too, but like, I don't get high, nor do I get drunk. I enjoy my occasional cocktail, but I don't judge anyone who does. And for those who do enjoy kind of an altered state, you might want to consider pairing that altered state with an issue like the Menace of Red Green Kryptonite. Because honestly, I think you'd have a really good time. So if you do that, let us know.
And I find it so interesting what aspects of these just shoot everything at the wall and see what sticks era of creating ends up sticking and becoming the thing that we love and becoming canon. So for example, yes, Brainiac has a ray that will shoot not actual kryptonite rocks, but waveforms, a beam that is a mixture of the effects of green and red kryptonite. But for this story to work, that effect has to linger for almost the entire story. Whereas if it's just, hey, here's a kryptonite rock, as soon as he gets away from it, he's fine. So now what is the effect of kryptonite on him? Because he got hit with a ray one time for about 5 seconds and spent weeks being this nutso hat collector who, could not make that third eye go away. I don't know how long in some of the other stories red kryptonite effect lasted, but I just find it interesting that everything is done just in service of the story at hand. And some things we just end up loving and find charming and we want to keep, and other things fall by the wayside. But this was definitely one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but just like I said, I had a lot of fun with it. I thought it was a blast. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. The next one, more just to note, I thought this was interesting. So Action 276, the very next issue, one of the stories in the issue, Supergirl's Three Super Girlfriends, where she is recruited into the future by 3 female members of the Legion of Superheroes, and she meets Brainiac 5 in his first appearance. And so he's introduced as this descendant of the original Brainiac, and there's all this talk about how the descendants of the original Brainiac are ashamed of the original's villainous legacy, and they've been trying to change that. And we even get a recounting of how Brainiac, the original Brainiac, ultimately met his end, that he was caught in his own, well, really actually thrown into the path of his own shrinking ray by Superman and shrunk down into nothingness, which is an idea that's going to come back when we get to the restoration of Kandor. So I really liked how that came back around. And the business about Brainiac 5 and who he's descended from, that will change too once we enter the territory of the robotic Brainiac and the adopted son as opposed to the biological descendant. But all that to say, just this idea of the legacy of Brainiac and what will come from this lineage in the future. And the fact that there's now this heroic spin on the identity of Brainiac. I just thought, obviously, we were well familiar with the character of Brainiac 5, but it was interesting to go back and look at that first encounter.
Yeah, and they had that, from the get-go. I mean, here is somebody who is good, and it's really on us now to get over our preconceptions and prejudices and accept him for who he is. But he's the one who was the native of the 30th century, and Supergirl is the visitor. So it was a really great story about that, about giving this person their own chance, net new, for being who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one here, the penultimate issue in this phase of the evil space alien. I don't have a ton to say about this one. This was Action 280, also from 1961, Brainiac's Super Revenge, where Brainiac wakes up in the distant past where Superman had sent him in that earlier issue. He returns. There's this extended sequence where he's passing by a prison planet and he's receiving all of these pleas for help from all of these prisoners, and he ignores them. He thinks they're beneath him. And there actually ends up being a good payoff when we get to the end of the issue. And Brainiac is now on this prison planet, and he's calling for help, and he's the one who's ignored. And I give this issue a lot of credit because as I was reading those first few pages, and this was my first time with this issue, I guess I didn't have that much faith, I'm sorry to say, but I was like, I doubt this is going to go anywhere. And I was very happy. I was like, okay, no, there was actually a nice payoff to this. But in this one, Brainiac returns and his revenge entails shrinking Superman and the Daily Planet crew who are in Africa on a story. So Superman, Lois, Perry, Jimmy are all shrunk down. But they end up getting help in the form of the Congorilla and Congo Bill, character I'm not terribly familiar with. I don't know if you have more experience now, but
no,
that's kind of the basics of this one.
I mean, definitely the payoff was the entire reason for the story. That not just the fact that he didn't help others who called out for help, but that he was so superior and so condescending and so self-important and self-grandizing as he refused to help them. I'm so much smarter than you. I'm so much better than you. That was the real payoff at the end, because as we'll find out in some of these stories, Brainiac is a 10th or 12th level, depending on when you encounter him. But we meet people who are 20th. And so the idea there's always a bigger fish is the payoff here of another person comes by and looks down on him.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely satisfying. It's funny, though, looking at these stories, we start in Action 242 with him bottling the major cities of Earth. Mm-hmm. And by this story, he's shrinking 4 people. Like and in that earlier story, he's stealing aluminum. I mean, I guess maybe you don't want to do the same thing over and over, and maybe you can't necessarily get bigger, but it's just kind of interesting. I feel like we're getting a little bit more pedestrian here as we're making our way forward. But maybe this also now begs another question, going back to that first issue and continuing through to this one. I mean, the shrinking of people and cities. I mean, how core an ingredient is that for you? It's there from the jump. It's there from that first story, and we'll continue to see that play out. Is that something that we must have?
It's inseparable. You have to have it. What I like are some of the later incarnations that delve more into why he does it, and it gives some some truly rich motivations for why he does it. Whether he is a steward of culture or almost like the arsonist who will protect six books from the library and burn the library down, so he's the only one who has those six books. One of the worst creatures that should be allowed to be roaming around out there. Do you give him credit for saving a remnant of Krypton, or do you punish him for all the evil that he did to Krypton? It's it's inseparable from who he is, though, that there is that baked into his DNA.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny in the this last story in this phase that we're going to talk about here, there is mention of why he's doing all of this, but in pretty much all of these stories in between, like we've kind of moved away from like I'm trying to repopulate this planet to rule, which I feel like we start off with some meat on the bone about like why he's doing this. And then, I guess maybe it does become just more about revenge and now this feud with Superman. But this idea of why he's doing this comes back in Superboy 106 from 1963 in a story called The Lair of Brainiac, where
Hmm.
this is another one. If you're going to have yourself a fun night, maybe dig this one out because this one was kind of wacky as well, where you have Superboy using his device to recall a forgotten memory as a baby on Krypton. Turns out that baby Kal-El was kidnapped by Brainiac to be held for ransom, but Brainiac unwittingly took him to a yellow sun planet, which had the effect of giving Kal-El power. So now you have Super Baby on this rampage on Krypton. He's bowling with bombs and he's tossing spaceships into the air, and he's driving Brainiac and his cronies crazy to the point where Brainiac just brings him back. But there is a point where Brainiac is I don't think he's like watching a tape of himself explaining why he's doing what he's doing. There are a lot of layers here because it's like Superboy remembering when he was a baby, and then Brainiac is looking at this tape or something like that. But again, there's this talk of repopulating the world, and the world in this issue is named as Briac or Bryac. I don't know what our pronunciation would be. So we're not even at the point of Kolu yet. We'll ultimately get there. But I don't know what stood out to you about this one.
There were a couple of really interesting things to me about this, but I would have to say, you know, big brush, this was like babysitting Jack Jack on The Incredibles. And if you loved that animated short, you're going to get a kick out of this one because it really is. We cannot control this kid. There's a point where he grows giant, and now you have this giant toddler, Godzillaing his way through everything that you hold dear. The ship that Kal-El threw into space was the pride and joy of Brainiac's fleet. So he threw the USS Enterprise just out there. Um, but it introduced the fact that back when Brainiac was written to be a flesh and blood living alien, it tells us that his race has a 200-year lifespan, which is kind of fascinating and something that, could have gotten some more mileage out of that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is, they originally kidnapped Kal-El for ransom in exchange for a weapon that Jor-El had access to. And so, in a way, Kal-El saves the galaxy by thwarting that exchange of weapon for him. So that was truly the very first time that Superman ever saved the universe was this Jack Jack weekend that he spent with Brainiac. But artistically, I think there were just some charming moments of just the visuals of how this was happening. And you just see Brainiac, if he had hair, he would have torn it out over this. But the thing that I would want to call the audience's attention to is when Cal was kidnapped, he was swooped down upon by a giant robot falcon. And the way that that is drawn is like a precursor to the Rebirth Brainiac that comes later with the skull ship. If you look at the face of the Falcon and the way that the eyes are set and the scales that go upon scales upon scales upon scales, and that's not the first robot animal that Brainiac built. I find it really interesting that probably through sheer coincidence, but artistically, it was sort of set up that this is the kind of aesthetic that Brainiac has. When he builds an animal and has it do a nefarious purpose, it looks like this. And later, when he had his own sort of metaphysical phoenix-like transformation, he made himself to that same aesthetic. So, if nothing else, Google it, give it a look. But I found that really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that that you zeroed in on that. That's a great observation. I want to give a shout out to our pal Rich Roney, who I've had so many great conversations with him about these kinds of Silver Age stories, and in fact, some of these exact stories when we've done other Silver Age discussions. And I was talking to him on the phone about this recording coming up, and he was like, "Well, what issues are you talking about?" And I was running through them with him. I mean, he hasn't read these issues in decades since he was a little kid. I was shocked at the detail that he was able to recall, like Baby Kal-El becoming giant in in Brainiac's Secret Lair. Like, it was amazing. I'm like, man, it's so impressive, and I guess a testament to these stories, especially. I think it really shows like how effective they were for their intended audience at the time. Like the fact that he still remembers them, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, you and I talked off mic, but I think it bears repeating that the Silver Age, if read now with a modern lens, is jarring. But for those guys like Rich and myself who grew up with these, there is sort of a grace that you can give them as you read them. Where if you think of it like a radio show, if you think of Bud Collyer and the Adventures of Superman describing the events that are happening, a giant meteor is coming. Lois is in danger. It's headed straight toward Metropolis. If I don't go now, I'll never save everyone in time. Now, just imagine that all those words stayed the same, but it was an extra layer of illustration with it. They had not yet gotten to post-crisis, where we got our Alan Moore and our Frank Miller and our Neil Gaiman, and we had the more literary, honestly, sort of the British invasion of true writing with prose, where it didn't need to double team like that, and it was able to abandon the old radio show format. But if you look at these in that way, I hear it in that voice, and it has an extra energy to it. And it has an extra sort of childlike wonder and the sense of endless imagination. And I find then it not only doesn't bother me, I'm really with it. It's just this fertile ground where anything can happen, and just go for the ride because you won't get lost. They'll make sure that you are along for the ride. So to me, it's almost a loving kind of way of writing. And I totally understand why guys like Rich, still have this in their memory, because that's the feeling that we had at the time.
100%. I co-sign all of that. So that concludes phase 1 of Brainiac as the evil space alien. And now we make our way into phase 2. And for those following along who might want to do some Brainiac reading of their own, if you really want the absolute essentials, you definitely would want Action 242, the first appearance, and you would 100% want Superman 167 from 1964 by Edmund Hamilton and Kurt Swan. And this is the team of Luthor and Brainiac. And this is where we get, for the first time, a true origin, but also a revised version of the character, that now it turns out Brainiac has actually been a computer in disguise, a robot in humanoid form. And this is a 3-part novel, so this is not like a 10-page story that's part of an issue. This is the full story here. An absolute standout. I before I get into, I guess, more plot points or whatnot, I guess what would you like to say about this one?
I think this is one of those sort of like, when X-Men rebooted back in the 70s. It's such a shift, but such a good shift. It caught up with the times, it caught up with the readership. I think it tied into all of the things that were good that were going on. It's like it switched lanes and hit center lane.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's so we were alluding to this earlier, but there's an editor's note at one point in the issue, and then there's a special announcement in the letters page. And I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'll read, I think, the most relevant portion here. So in the letters page, DC tells the audience, shortly after the first Brainiac story appeared in Action Comics in 1956, we learned that a real Brainiac existed in the form of an ingenious Brainiac computer kit invented in 1955 by Edmund C. Berkeley. Mr. Berkeley is a distinguished scientist and a world authority on automation, computers, and robots. In deference to his Brainiac, which predates ours, with this issue of Superman, we are changing the characterization of our Brainiac so that the master villain will henceforth possess a computer personality. Readers will be interested to learn that they can build their own Brainiac by purchasing one of Mr. Berkeley's computer kits and assembling the parts. So it seems that there was some legal maneuvering going on here, either legal action taken or threatened by Berkeley Enterprises, the makers of this Brainiac computer kit. And in order to smooth it over, DC made this shift and then is also encouraging the youngsters to go out and buy their own Brainiac computer kit. And not surprisingly, like, they're painting this as like, hey, like we're doing this great thing, and they're doing everybody a favor by letting you know about this Brainiac computer kit. But oh man, I would love to know more about kind of the back and forth behind the scenes on this one. But it's like wild that right accounts for this major shift in the character.
Yeah, I think that whole last paragraph could have been read in lawyer voice at the end of a commercial, where they even go on to explain how affordable these kits are and the hours of enjoyment you can have with you and your family by buying this kit. But I think that even so, the shift making Brainiac a computer was one of the best things they could have done to the character. It made him have a whole other challenge than really had been there before. And honestly, I think it took them a while to find their footing with just how much they could do with that. It still had some remnants of just your standard 1950s, easily defeatable in every issue villain. But the idea that this is possible, that you can take a villain and completely change who and what he is and have him keep going, and then that they would do it again and they would do it again, that transformative quality of Brainiac, I think, was the thing that they unlocked here. And so for that, I think it's hugely important.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also too, going back to this whole idea of the cold demeanor and nature of the character, it's not that we really shift into that mode quite yet, but I feel like this is paving the way for that, especially by the time that we get to the true robot form in that Bronze Age rebirth story, where we go on that acid trip, like you said, through the cosmos. And Brainiac discovers the master programmer and thinks Superman is his angel of death, and all of that business. But I do think that this shift to the computer / robot paves the way for that more cold, calculating nature. So even if we're not quite there yet, I think this is an essential building block towards that. And it's also like it is a way to, because he's a robot in humanoid form. So it's like he's not just a full on robot, and he's not any longer just an evil alien. And we have other alien invaders in the pages all the time. So I feel like it does now start to carve a more distinct lane for the character as well.
Yeah, I mean, he became so much more interesting. I mean, first of all, some of his agency was taken away, and that he was built by a race of master programmers to be a spy. And so in a sense, he didn't choose the thug life. I mean, he was made to be a humanoid spy. He was programmed the way he was programmed. And there's even a great little vignette where the master programmers are saying, we have the capability to give him a level 12 intelligence, which would surpass our own at a level 10. And they decide, no, that's too dangerous. Let's not do that, which comes back into play later on. but it shows that wonderful narrative thing that you can do sometimes of these master programmers had just gone full Skynet and subjugated all the living things on their planet. And in doing so, told them, you pitiful little sixth level intellect creatures, we are 10th level. And therefore, we're just going to demolish everything that you hold dear, and we're going to take over. And then they have, this new Brainiac construct on their table, and they're discussing, well, we could make him a 12. And they're like, no, 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 no. So I love that aspect of it. But it sort of opened the door to, well, what are the intellect levels that are existing right now? So they're afraid of a 12th because they're a 10th. Luther is a 9. The living sentient creatures on the planet of the master programs are 6th level, which equates to human. So humans are 6th, and in fact, Superman himself is a 6th. But upon research, Batman is an 8. So just shy of Luther. So if you're going to look for, I'm sure you'd have to throw Mr. Terrific in there, but we're talking about they're 2 or 3 levels above most of the people here on the planet. But for Superman himself to be a 6th level intellect, and even this programmed Brainiac to be a 10th, poses that great gap of hero and villain, where now the hero has to get creative. Now he has to call upon other skills and other avenues that he hasn't previously done. You can't punch your way out of this. You can't fall back to a previous thing that you did. You have to get creative. And for that, I mean, this is a watershed moment in Brainiac's history. And then the fact that, Luther first realizes Brainiac is not what I thought he was, which later becomes the theme of he's either not what you think he is, or he's changed since the last time you saw him. So again, as a villain, you cannot prep for him. It's not like the days of Mixie, where Superman could sit around and say, well, I've got X amount of time until the next time he comes. I'm going to make my plan and prep. You cannot prep for Brainiac.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. And that's talking about those building blocks, the fact that, he's not what you thought he was. And then now carrying that thread all the way through to today, and a story like I referenced before, like House of Brainiac, where it's like, he can take all of these different forms. It's setting the stage for kind of this unpredictable appearance of the character. No, I agree with all that. I mean, so as I was getting at before, it's like, now we're past the point of, a plague wiped out his homeworld. We're not in that territory anymore. What we get here is, I think, vastly more interesting and so timely and eerie to be reading that in our present day, the story of this planet, still not named Kolu yet, who have created and come to rely on these computer overlords who subjugate them. And like you said, create this spy in the form of Brainiac. I give them credit, even though we have a retcon in terms of like the plague business, but the fact that there's such a point about how he's a spy, like Brainiac's a spy. He's meant to appear as a human, not as an inorganic being. So much so that they even imprint the brain patterns of one of the dying inhabitants of the planet on him as he's being created. So I felt like that was an elegant way of saying, like, hey, like all of these stories that you've read before with Brainiac, he wasn't displaying a robotic nature, but there was a very specific reason for it. And the fact that it's such a point that he wants to keep this a secret. And there's the other huge thing I think with this is, like you're saying, the Lex component of it, where Lex fails, he escapes from prison at the beginning of the issue. He fails yet again to destroy Superman, and realizes, and I thought this was fascinating for Lex of all people, to recognize his own limitations, right? And to use his time-space scanner to scour the universe for the mightiest intellect. And so he comes upon Brainiac, and he gets to see now this true backstory that we've been laying out for Brainiac, and rescues Brainiac from that prison planet that we had mentioned before, and reprograms Brainiac and gives him that upgrade upgrades his intelligence, but also builds in a timer so that he could control Brainiac. But then Brainiac later uses a hypno ray on Lex to undo that and to erase Lex's memory of him being a robot. So I love that back and forth. The pairing of the two, whether they're aligned or they're at odds, is iconic, and we continue to see that play out. We're going to see that, a couple summers from now. So to have that piece of the puzzle now come into play, the Luthor Brainiac team, absolutely fantastic. And the last thing I'll say is just to have the Superman emergency squad, the Kandorians, save the day at the end, right? To get some measure of revenge on the being who bottled Kandor was so satisfying, yet then so bittersweet, because Brainiac uses this coma ray on Superman, and the Kandorians have to let Brainiac and Lex go in exchange for them reviving Superman. So, I mean, this is such a standout, man.
It really is, and I give it extra points for setting up that the Luthor and Brainiac team up was always based in betrayal.
Yes.
Luthor never intended to have an honest partnership with Brainiac. He went full Amanda Waller and put a bomb in Brainiac's head. And he said, the second you do something I don't like, I will end you. Now, how Luthor as a 9th level intellect was able to put a 12th level intellect reprogram into Brainiac, we'll skip that. That's okay. We don't have to get caught up in that. But the fact that Luthor did not predict, if I make Brainiac 12th level, he'll think of a way out of this. Well, he did. Brainiac is now a 12th level intellect. And what did he put that intellect towards? A way out. And so he lures this poor, unsuspecting 9th level flesh and blood creature into, sit in this chair and look at my special beam. And now I own you. Now you're going to take this bomb out of my head, and you're going to forget that most of this happened, and you're going to think that I'm not, the threat that I am to you. Was so delicious to know that from the get-go, this was their relationship, and all the way through the whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, that betrayal of as soon as I have my chance, I'm going to take you down, is so legitimately satisfying to see it here. It's like the internal consistency award of the decade.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, it's one of those things when you, especially when you look at something like this, which lays the groundwork, the foundation for this entire dynamic between them, and then you carry that all the way through to whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. They only get so many pages in that, but to have it start, their portion at least, with Lex finding Brainiac's head and thinking like, hey, like now I'm going to study this alien technology, take it apart. But no, turns out Brainiac is still in there and takes over Lex and just puppeteers his body until Lex
he begs for death.
Yeah, until Lex is able to break through and beg Super Lana to end his life, which he does. And then Brainiac continues to puppeteer the body until it finally gives out, and Brainiac just sputters away in those final moments and then just kind of crashes out there. It's like in and of itself, obviously it works, but especially when it bookends Superman 167, it's like, yeah, you know what? That is the right end for those two, I think.
This story fired on all cylinders because if you are, like you mentioned, the ending, so Kandorians had to make a choice. They, in order to save Superman, who was in a coma, and Brainiac is the only one who could free him from that coma, even though Brainiac was on trial with Lex Luthor as his lawyer, who was also on trial, but that's okay. They had to make this choice of, if we take our just vengeance upon Brainiac, the price for that, the tangential price for that, is the life of Superman. And they decided that was a cost too high. And that has emotional punch in the mix with everything else that has gone on in this story. They had no say in what happened to them, but they did have a say in what they do with it. And that was powerful.
and not the first time, right? Because going back to Action 242, at the climax of that story, Superman is able to get out of the bottle city of Kandor. There's only enough juice in the enlarging ray for either himself or the bottle city. And the Kandorians make the choice for him. They don't want to deprive the world of the hero that Superman is. Like, they sacrificed their own opportunity to have the city enlarged so that Superman can. And again, it's a choice that they make for Superman. Just like here, he's comatose. They make that choice because he would never go along with that. But it really shows the level of self-sacrifice that they're willing to make, and also how much faith they have in Superman himself.
Exactly. And at least they did have a choice. And I think in a sense that is their closure and their dignity regained. This is our choosing and our decision. But another cylinder that was firing here is if you're a fan of the arc of Lex on Lexor.
Yeah, that's in there too. I know.
This is the first appearance of Adora, who introduces herself as Tharla, but it is Adora, Lex's future wife, the future mother of his child. She's the mother of Lex Jr. And that entire arc where then they ultimately perish, and then Lex blames Superman in, I hate that he's never realized prior. This one story set up so many of those dominoes.
Yeah, I mean, I love all the Lexor business. DC, if you're listening, I mean, a Lexor-centric DC finest trade would be beautiful. Just putting that out there. But yeah, I mean, look, Edmund Hamilton, absolutely a phenomenal writer of this era. I think I always really gravitate to his issues in particular. So this was such a standout, an absolute essential. The ones that are coming up here, maybe we might run through a little bit faster. So Action 342 in 1966, the superhuman bomb. Notable here because this is an instance where Brainiac and Superman actually work together. There's this alien invader, Grax, who had attacked Brainiac to challenge him and prove his superiority earlier in the issue. And then he straps this existential level bomb to Superman and engulfs the Earth in a force field. But Brainiac emerges and gives Superman key advice to win the day. And there's a moment of understanding and cooperation. I mean, obviously it doesn't last to subsequent stories, but it was interesting that there was that moment between them, that Brainiac was capable of that. I mean, does that track with his robotic programming that he would feel so aggrieved by this attack that he would align with his enemy? I don't know, but it was interesting.
I think it does because of how the story begins. So Grax is one of those characters who has a 20th level intellect, and he shows up condescending and rude toward Lex, saying, I could conquer the galaxy by myself, but the one thing I don't have is the force field that you somehow have been able to invent, and that's eluded me. So rather than come and have any sort of civilized conversation with you, I'm just going to take it. I think that in and of itself affected the ego of Brainiac just like it would have the ego of Lex. Like, all right, I'm taking you down at some point for having done that to me.
As a movie lover and independent filmmaker myself, I appreciate the importance of great, well-run film festivals, and one family of fests has you covered in New York and New Jersey. Don't miss Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Round Reel in Bloomfield, and Shorts and Stout in Long Beach. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. My comic shop closed over a decade ago, but if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. Yeah, fair. I think that works. Also, too, I love it because we've been getting the McFarlane superpowers figures. You can see a few of them on the shelf behind me, and there are a good number that stay in their packaging down here in the podcast studio. But there are others that my son and I open and play with, and we've been playing with the Brainiac in the Skull Ship and the Superman in the Supermobile, and it's a blast. And a lot of times he wants the two of them to work together. I think just because he wants us to work together. And it's great. And we make it work and it's fun. But after I did my homework for this, I was like, hey buddy, I'm like, look, there's actually a story where this happens, where they work together. So I love it for that, if for nothing else. So that's the Superhuman Bomb. World's Finest 164, also from 66, Brainiac's Super Brainchild, where Brainiac creates this female android counterpart who poses as the head of the UN Security Council, who's introducing this revolutionary smog-reducing device that Brainiac then replaces with shrinking rays. But Superman was ahead of him, was a step ahead, and was basically able to fool Brainiac, long story short. But I wanted to include this, just to have some World's Finest representation here. Is also a wild opening to this issue. Do you want to talk about it? At the fortress?
Where she's just seemingly killing Superman and Batman?
No, well, where Brainiac is...
Oh, where he comes in disguised as Batman.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Cal is in the fortress just minding his own business. The next thing you know, there's a distress call that looks like Batman is just in all kinds of trouble in his bat plane and needs to emergency land, and doors open, come on in, and then Batman starts acting like the most non-subtle kleptomaniac. Like he keeps trying to tuck Kandor in his cape and walk off. And Cal figures it out pretty quickly that's Brainiac wearing a Batman head.
Yeah, Batman face and the cape and cowl. It's the image of the Batman face and cape and cowl coming off Brainiac is I gotta screenshot that and post it. It's amazing.
and there's a scene where Cal's basically telling him you can't take Kandor, and Brainiac goes, but why? It's pretty great.
It's amazing. By the way, as often comes up when we talk, especially about pre-crisis comics, everything that we're talking about, boy, I would love to say they're all on the DC app, or they're all in a DC Finest collection or an omnibus. They're not. There were a good number where we had to resort to the means that we often have to resort to when it comes to something like this. But I hope that this material continues to be collected, whether it's an omnibus, a DC Finest, it makes its way to the app, like whatever it is. I, as always, would gladly give DC money to have these stories in the best reproduction possible. But unfortunately, not all of them are as readily available as you might hope. But this one, it's funny. I wasn't thinking this as I read it, but now as we're talking through it, it's like, was this an inspiration for the Brainiac Queen in House of Brainiac? Like this idea of Brainiac creating this female counterpart? I don't know, but it was interesting.
I mean, it's almost like someone thought of the pun brainchild and just said, I've got to do that. And wrote this entire wacky story, and the fact that the key element was smog. Welcome to the 70s, where the UN would gather to talk about that.
Yeah, there's that. And then I guess the only other thing that really stood out to me was at the very end where Robin is aghast at the idea that Batman and Superman would be blasting this female android to smithereens. Because even though she's a robot, she still doesn't deserve death. And it turns out Batman was trying to send her to the Phantom Zone. Superman actually tried to and succeeded in blasting her to Kandor, where she's going to be reprogrammed. I forgot to look. I don't know offhand if she ever returns. I kind of doubt it, but I doubt it. Is the short answer.
I doubt it. I think as a character, she served her purpose. But it does raise two questions that I had about just this whole arc, the whole run of Brainiac and how Superman deals with him. So first of all, this question that, Robin was aghast that they were going to kill a robot. Superman kills robots all the time. He lays waste to robots left and right. In the Fleischer cartoons on, if you are a robot, get ready to be spread across Metropolis. So why the special treatment towards Brainiac now that we realize that's all he is? If they had said, hey, this human that we had on the table next to him when he was constructed, and that's the imprint and that's his pattern of why he, if that were depicted as that person is still in there, I could understand it. That Superman would not take, like, he might have that same belief of one day I'll resize Kandor's. One day I'm going to find a way to save that person who's trapped inside of Brainiac. But that's not the case here. And if you go back even all the way through the Superboy comics, he makes these robots of himself that meet terrible demises all the time. He'll send them in knowing that they'll be destroyed. Superman's, pedestal of how much I have to protect the existence of a robot is non-existent. So for that special treatment to be applied towards Brainiac is a dichotomy, at least.
Yes, I agree with all that. And the other thing that it makes me think of, first of all, like Batman and Superman, you guys got to get on the same page here. They're blasting this robot with two wildly different devices. But it makes me think, as once again, of whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. It's like, Mixus-Pitalik trying to return to the fifth dimension while being blasted to the Phantom Zone. It kills him. So here we have the Phantom Zone and Kandor. It's not the same thing, but it's like, yeah, they could have easily inadvertently destroyed this robot after all.
Right. And that's my second point of the times that Superman has dealt with Brainiac in the past, and then a couple of the issues that we're still going to get to, were so haphazard. At one point, he basically hog-tied Brainiac and just threw him into space and said something like, well, he'll just keep going. Well, that's not being a good steward of preventing the Earth and your loved ones from the return of Brainiac. If you have the Phantom Zone projector and you know he is a robot, there's your solve. There were prison planets that have been established. There are places in the universe from which you cannot return. I mean, any of those.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. And even when he sends Brainiac to the past, I mean, all right, fair enough. Brainiac was in suspended animation because then there's this whole business about him waking up. But like, what about the ramifications to the space-time continuum? I always bring it back to Power Rangers. And then there's a wild arc, I'll keep this quick, where Tommy Oliver, the then White Ranger, is cloned. And the clone is turned evil, but then they free him from the spell. At the end of this arc, Daniel, the Power Rangers leave the clone in the past where part of this adventure had taken place. And I'm saying to myself, Zordon is allowing this? What about the ramifications to the space-time continuum? Is the clone Tommy's own ancestor? It's bonkers. So I say to myself, yeah, I feel like there are some considerations here that are not being made. Crazy. All right, this next one, The Man Who Murdered Metropolis. This is from Superman 271 in 1974. So we've jumped ahead now. We're in Elliot S. Maggin territory. And this one, Brainiac's threat here, he creates this mirror image of Metropolis that can destroy the city if it comes into contact. This is another instance where Superman essentially like tricks Brainiac. It gets a step ahead and makes it look like something's happened that hasn't. But what stood out to me here were the nicknames that Brainiac is peppering Superman with throughout this whole thing. Old Father of Modern Gardening, Old Ohio College Town, Old Paleolithic Cavern. These are the things Brainiac is saying to Superman the entire issue. Did I miss something about where this came from? Because this really was odd.
No, they're not part of the vernacular that I'm aware of. Those were not common insults that were hurled around unless they were trying to be euphemisms for something else. If you didn't want to say something truly insulting, you would paraphrase to this. But I couldn't reverse engineer what the original might have been. It almost made me want the panel where Superman turns to Brainiac and says, "Are you having a stroke?"
Yeah, like is your programming malfunctioning? Like what is going on?
Or maybe that was a clue that would have helped him defeat Brainiac, saying this is not his normal speech pattern, something's going on, and that's his way in to this particular victory.
Yeah, I don't know. Any audience member, if there's something about this issue that we didn't clock, please reach out and let me know, because it was just a weird tick to imbue the character with, and I don't know if this was something that then continued in other issues or not, but it was just weird, man.
And this is the one where he just flings him into space, and the direct quote that Superman says to himself for the benefit of the reader is, "For all time, helpless to change his direction." Yeah, we're not buying that.
No, how many times does this guy have to come back? Before we make a little bit more of an effort here. All right, the last story in this phase of Brainiac's comic book history, Superman 338, Let My People Grow, from 1979, where Kandor is finally restored. And you can't do the story and not have Brainiac in it, right? It's only fitting that he's there. And here, essentially, Superman baits Brainiac to use the shrinking ray on Superman, because Superman wants to test the enlarging process on himself, but he needs to be shrunk first. And this is the story where we have the enlarger ray deflecting a shrinking ray at Brainiac, and he seemingly shrinks down to nothingness. Obviously, that's not the end of him, but a nice kind of full circle moment with that Brainiac 5 history that we had learned earlier. I thought.
Mm-hmm. I am a big fan of the sci-fi classic, The Incredible Shrinking Man. And if you are familiar with that, that is the end of that movie where he shrinks to nothingness and goes subatomic, decades before Ant-Man, and becomes sort of one with the universe. But that's his end, as he just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And I think to readers at the time, if this was where that left off, it could have almost been poetic. In the way that, what if in doing so, Brainiac finally understood what the universe was about, and that was his cosmic consciousness awakening, and maybe if he did return, he would return as something possibly good, or at least transformed in some unpredictable way, which is fairly close to what did end up happening. But that shrinking into whatever nothing is was either the best end that could have happened, because for a guy who went around the universe shrinking everybody, to have that then be his own karmic turnabout, or as a way to transform him, either way was still pretty sweet. But again, Superman didn't cry any tears over it, so
he's fine.
It was, oh well.
He's fine. Well, it's funny, going back to what we were talking about, like even the Superboy story that introduced Bizarro, and he was not a living being. Like they really make that point.
Mm-hmm.
And Superboy's fine when he's blown apart at the end. So on the comic book side, of course, we still have to talk about Brainiac's robotic rebirth and the lead up to that. But I want to take some time to talk about Brainiac in other media during this time, specifically Filmation and Super Friends. So, you and I, we've talked a good bit about the Filmation cartoons. We did a whole great episode on the Filmation Superboy segments. And I think, I don't know, maybe before the year is out, I'll finally tackle the Filmation Superman shorts in full. I don't know. Don't hold me to that. But for this, at least, I took a look at basically all, I believe, of the Filmation Superman segments from 1966 and 1967 that featured Brainiac. If anyone wants to look up these specific segments, they were a bit out of order here because we have the return of Brainiac first, and then later Superman meets Brainiac. But we have those two. APE Strikes Again. APE is an acronym, the Allied Perpetrators of Evil. Brainiac's Bubbles. The Cage of Glass, and then there was one other one where I think Luthor's Lethal Laser, where there's a team up in the second part. I guess Well, let me before I go further. What stands out to you about the depiction of Brainiac in the filmation world here?
Well, this was my childhood, so I watched these in real time, and the thing that stood out was by virtue of hierarchy, Lex was always going to be top dog in these, whether it's the Legion of Doom or Ape or whatever the group of ne'er-do-well criminals that's put together. It's always going to be Lex at the top, and it's always going to be him having to control the fact that they're all selfish, horrible criminals, not team players. Um, and Brainiac was, in my opinion, just relegated to going along and doing what the short animation story needed. Um, if you needed Brainiac, he was there. If you didn't, he wasn't. So it didn't really have, the watershed moments that the comics did, but it kept the character alive and you got to see him, running around and doing things. And every now and then you got that side eye he would give Lex of, I don't like you at all.
Yeah, it's I've talked about Filmation before. I did see at least a selection of these. I remember there was a VHS compilation that existed that I had rented from a local video store. And the one specifically, Superman meets Brainiac, where Brainiac is shrinking the circus animals and essentially creating a Noah's Ark. That was one of the ones that I saw. That was like seared into my brain. I've always had that. But like, I feel like their take, it's a very basic robot. So he's a robot in humanoid form with the green skin and the purple outfit, the typical deal. But again, a fairly bare bones basic robot. The backstory here, weirdly, is that he comes from the planet Mega or Mega. They say it both ways across all of these shorts here. But he was created by Dr. Hekla. And it seems like it's, if memory serves, it's the kind of the original backstory where I think the planet had been wiped out and Hekla was the sole inhabitant of this planet and created him and they're going to repopulate and rule. I think that was the basic gist of it here. So yeah, that first appearance, you have him taking the circus animals, 2 of each, and also takes Superman and Lois. We've got the force field. We have an invisibility shield as well. We've got the flying saucer. So like those trappings are there. There's another one where he abducts Superman and Lois in bubbles, and Lois is going to be like the queen of this planet. They're going to brainwash her. Some shady business there. And it's not until the Cage of Glass, one of the final Brainiac appearances, where he finally bottles Metropolis. Like we finally get some city bottling going on here. But there's one of them, I think it's the Return of Brainiac, where he shrinks Superman, Lois, and Jimmy. I think it's that one. He doesn't speak. There's at least one where he just doesn't talk in the whole thing. So I don't know how much there is to unpack here, but I guess notable. I mean, this is the first other media adaptation of Brainiac. Yeah. Right. I mean, this was
I think so.
The first,
yeah.
So notable in that respect.
And I think it brought into popular culture. If you don't read the comics, you now know evil robot, evil green skinned robot. And there you go. It's established. Now that's who he is.
Yeah. Evil green skinned robot, force field shrinking, right. That's there. Not a lot there in terms of the characterization. It is very robotic. It's not the track of like, oh, he's going to blend in and appear human. It's like, no, it's not that. So yeah, I mean, my mileage was fairly limited on those segments, but I did take the time to watch those 6-minute segments. We also had The World's Deadliest Game from Super Friends in 1978. This was during the challenge of the Super Friends season with the Legion of Doom, and I just picked one that seemed to be a little bit more Brainiac centric. Even that turned out to not have like a ton of Brainiac, but that was one where Brainiac cloaks the Earth, and then he lures Wonder Woman, Hawkman, and Black Vulcan to a planet that's been rigged up by Toyman. But there too, green skin, computer mind, the basic, the typical Brainiac that we've been talking about here. I take it was this a formative part of your childhood, or was this a little bit too late?
I think I was more the comic book core, so to me, that was my truth. And Saturday mornings were still so much better that these were on, but I didn't feel like it mapped onto what my core truth was. They were a fun distraction and a fun entertainment diversion. I did notice when things just seemed really off,
Yeah.
where, his voice was not at all what you would think his voice would be.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. There's another Super Friends episode that we'll hit on a little bit later, The Wrath of Brainiac. That's more Brainiac centric, and that's when we're into the more robotic appearing Brainiac. But like I said, in the 60s and 70s, just those Filmation segments and Super Friends, you had, like we said, that, typical robot in humanoid form, green skin,
Yeah.
force field, shrinking stuff. That's what we had in animation. So you did have that carryover.
Now, I will give it that for the viewing audience of the childhood age that we were, you need your bad guy sometimes to just be the pure bad guy. And when you know that's who it is, you can get straight to it and you can have your 6-minute or 8-minute adventure. And you know that at the end, when he gets sucked in the jaw, boy, did he have it coming, because he was the bad guy. He's always the bad guy. So in a sense, some of that purity is good.
Yeah.
It definitely kept Brainiac alive in the mythos, and I think sometimes that's a heavy lift that the comics or other mediums can't do at the time. So credit to the animated.
Yeah, honestly, it's not, it's not even that I'm taking them to task for not having more nuance. It's just that I don't have a ton to say about it. But I think what we're getting at, I think, is what there is to say, that this, like you said, kept it alive and exposed the character to people who might not have been reading the comics. So, important in that respect. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the original treatment for Superman 3 by Ilya Salkind, right? The 7-page treatment. Now, we've talked about this before when we've talked about Superman 3, maybe also when we talked about the Helen Slater movie. I think we'll probably also circle back to it when we get into our Supergirl coverage. And there are articles and such on it about that. But essentially, in this treatment, you have Brainiac, who's described as like being in all black. So it would have been a little bit of a different aesthetic for the character, like a darker version of Brainiac. Who finds Supergirl after she escapes Krypton, and he raises her and then also falls in love with her. So very creepy aspect here. And she rejects his marriage proposal. She comes to Earth, falls in love with Superman. This is a version of the story. The treatment is very clear. They're not related in this, thankfully.
Right.
At least we have that. But yeah, then we have Brainiac targeting Superman in order to defeat him and reclaim Supergirl, and he creates this personality altering machine. So essentially what we would get in the actual Superman 3 in the form of the synthetic kryptonite that affects his personality. But in this original treatment, it was Brainiac and this machine. There was also time travel and Mr. Mxyzptlk involved and all of that. But just kind of a wild look at what could have been, and harkens back to what we were saying before about an intended use of Brainiac on the big screen that ultimately didn't happen.
Yeah. I'm glad that one didn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't think it hit the core strings of what Brainiac can do. I think that would have been a big miss.
When we talked about Superman Reborn early last year, the unmade 5th Christopher Reeve film, and we went through the whole thing and we talked about how the take there, you had Brainiac, who had been watching all of this television and was fixated on human culture, and he transfers his consciousness into the clone body of a deceased police officer. But then he takes a romantic interest in Lois. That's one thing that stands out. He's like real horned up, this Brainiac in Superman Reborn. So I feel like the Ilya Salkind take on Brainiac, he seemed to be very interested in this idea of like Brainiac the lover, which would not be my instinct with Brainiac, especially in a first outing. It's like, I keep going back to House of Brainiac, but it's like, I think at a point, maybe you could do a story where it's like, okay, Brainiac is yearning for something more. Like he realizes something is missing. He creates a Brainiac queen. But I don't know that I would start with that. So it's just kind of interesting to I keep coming back to this word interesting because I want to be diplomatic, but all right. Shall we talk about our final phase of Brainiac here?
This is where it really kicks in. So yes.
Yeah. So we're building towards 1983's Rebirth arc, where Brainiac is reborn in this robotic form with the skull ship and all of that. But there are a couple of stories that lead to it. One of them is Action 514, Countdown of the Killer Computer from 1980, written by Marv Wolfman, drawn by Kurt Swan. And this is where we have this mysterious attacker. The attacks are emanating from the Fortress of Solitude. It turns out to be Brainiac. So he survived shrinking into oblivion and has infiltrated the fortress to repair himself. And this is where Superman secretly reprograms Brainiac. So this is another more ammunition for when my son and I are playing. It's like, how are we going to account for Superman and Brainiac working together? We have this story where Superman successfully, secretly reprogrammed Brainiac, and they part as allies. And then that carries into at least the beginning of the Planet Eater arc from Action 528 to 530, a couple of years later, where Brainiac had created this device that grew to be this Planet Eater, and enlists Superman's help. And you find out that in the interim, between 514 and 528, like the reformed Brainiac has been traveling the galaxy and trying to undo the evil that he had wrought along the way. Yeah, like what do you make of this whole chapter, this reprogramming business?
I absolutely loved it. It was what we were saying before of when he shrinks to nothingness, did something transformative happen to him? It turns out, no. He had wisely, as a 12th level intellect, thought to himself, one day someone might use this shrink ray on me. And I am going to want a fail safe. And so he built one in. If anyone shrinks me and I get to a certain minuscule size, my fail safe will kick in and it'll enlarge me right back up. Brilliant. Would not have guessed that one as a kid reading this, but it's one of those moments where you can truly appreciate 12th level intellect. Okay. So the fact that it started with that meant, okay, Marv has put some thought into this. Now, where is he going to go with it? Because the prison break was great. So it turns out that he wants to reach 20th level himself. Also genius, because that would absolutely be true. And so he feels like, well, Kryptonian tech is what's going to get me there. Breaks into the fortress. Perfectly sensible. Now, Superman catches him. And so Brainiac is sort of hooked up to all these wires and he's sucking out all the information he needs out of the Kryptonian tech. And Superman Trojan horses him. He uses his, X-ray vision and superpowers to reprogram his Kryptonian tech that Brainiac is sucking out. And in that way, infects Brainiac, Star Trek Borg style with goodness, and that is a brilliant bit of writing. He didn't do what he did to Genia, the brainchild of Lex, which is go straight into her head and mess with it. He messed with his own Kryptonian tech, which Lex was stealing. So even morally and ethically, that kind of works. Hey, if you weren't stealing it, this wouldn't have happened to you. But now, all of a sudden, Brainiac is shaking his hand and calling him friend. And as the reader, we're like, whoa, what happened? And then he gives you the quick little flashback and you go, all right, now Superman, good job. Good job for using your brain. And the thing that we were talking about earlier, which is Brainiac is the villain that forces you to adjust and forces you to be clever instead of straightforward. And that's what this was. So all of that setup was great. And it only took 22 years after the creation of Brainiac for that to happen. But it did. And I personally am really grateful because I was right at the age where I appreciated this. If it had come sooner or later, I think I would have missed it. So just, chef's kiss, golf clap for the way that they brought Brainiac back from nothingness and what they immediately did with him.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It would have been such a missed opportunity to never do this story, especially in the pre-crisis era. So yeah, I'm glad we actually had this, more than an attempt at reprogramming, a successful reprogramming. It will ultimately be undone in the Planet Eater story we'll talk about in a second. But at least we had that. Superman's awfully confident in the reprogramming, though. He doesn't make Brainiac stay for further tests or anything. He sends him off. But no, like it was great to see that happen. This was, look, in terms of everything that we looked at, a lot of it I was already familiar with. There were some that I was reading for the first time. This was one of them, and this was a pocket of the character's history that he had been reprogrammed and had been an ally for this short period of time that was unknown to me, that was new. So, I was really kind of fascinated by that. But then, like we're saying, we get to this Planet Eater arc, and it's tragic. Like Superman ultimately has to undo this reprogramming so that Brainiac will be equipped to defeat the Planet Eater, and is ultimately trapped in the Planet Eater at the end of that arc. So yeah, I mean, like compelling stuff here.
Yeah, it was reminiscent of to me the first Star Trek movie of V'ger. You have this creation that has grown in and of itself and is now a huge threat. And Superman, in a sense, has to make a similar choice that the Kandorians did during the trial of the only way to save countless lives, because they show that this creation has now grown out of control. And despite Superman and the now good Brainiac's combined efforts, they could not stop it from destroying an entire planet and every single sentient life that was on it. And Superman is distraught by that. He's broken by that they couldn't stop it. And they realized the only way that it can be stopped is the original programming of Brainiac. And so that's the call. That's the decision that he has to make. And it has a bit of that Clockwork Orange morality to it as well, because you have something evil that is just going to continue. There's no path except complete reprogramming. But then you're forced to put it back. And now everything that happens is on you. But what choice did you have? And those are those moments where we can truly appreciate how difficult it is to be a hero. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I truly appreciate this story on a philosophical level, is because some wins are clear wins and some are not.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to include this portion here instead of jumping right to Rebirth, because I thought it was important runway, before we get there. And so now we reach our crescendo of this episode as we approach the 2-hour mark here. But this is essentially really where it all culminates here in the pre-crisis era with this Rebirth storyline. So again, if you're keeping score at home, you want the absolute essential reads for pre-crisis Brainiac. You have Action 242. You have Superman 167. You have to have the Brainiac portion of Action Comics 544 by Marv Wolfman and Gil Kane. Again, this is 1983, a couple years before Crisis. But we pick up with Brainiac trapped in that Planet Eater. And he, unbeknownst to Superman, triggers a star to go supernova, and Superman has to intervene. Brainiac's intending to use the energy from that supernova to free himself, but instead his physical form dissolves and his consciousness now begins to travel. And first he arrives at this machine planet, and then he goes from world to world absorbing information. And you talk about building blocks of the character here. And this idea of this collector and the acquisition of knowledge, right? As far as essential ingredients go, I mean, that's on the list as well. And I feel like this is really where that starts to come into play. And then, as you were getting at before, where it gets like very acid trippy here, is that the consciousness travels through a black hole to the beginning of time. And he observes the hand, right? The hand at the beginning of creation that he interprets as the master programmer. And he sees a vision of Superman, who he perceives to be the angel of death, i.e. the agent of the master programmer who sent Superman to kill him. And then at the climax of this, right, Brainiac creates this new robotic form for himself. Like we're saying, that honeycomb brain case and the skull ship, just an iconic look. I have the Superpowers action figure of that robotic look in the case behind me here. And starts going from planet to planet and ravaging them. And Superman has to call in the Justice League and the Teen Titans to help. But what's so interesting to me about this evolution of the character is the dichotomy, because it's like, on the one hand, the form now is fully robotic. He's not disguised as a humanoid at this point, right? Like, he's fully robotic. Yet the depth of the motivation and the calculation, right, has really been kicked up a notch. It's not as necessarily basic as it was before. Yet the characterization now is shifting into that more cold approach. So just like fascinating shifts happening with this.
Yeah, and I like that it raised itself above the pettiness of some of the earlier stories. He would come be antagonistic to Superman for really superficial, meaningless reasons. I mean, the whole threat against Lana and Lois was just to come and poke Superman, and I don't know. But here he has a much higher calling and a much higher self-purpose, that if Superman is the agent of death that he has to watch out for, okay, but he's no longer the only thing that he has on his docket. And I think that makes him much more dangerous, because at least when Mixie and Brainiac were coming to Earth to constantly plague and torment Superman, he knew where they were. And better that he be the focus than countless other worlds who would be beneath their jack-heeled boots, right? As we saw in Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. If Mixie goes bad, it's so much worse. So I think this was one of those where if there were a soundtrack to these stories, the music would change.
Yes.
And we would feel the tone is not what it was, and this is something other.
He levels up, as the kids would say. And yeah, there's almost a godlike air about him. And I think that's something that will carry through moving forward. And especially, when you get to, I don't know, maybe something like the Convergence iteration of Brainiac, where, kind of more of this like godlike type being. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you see that ingredient here as well. It's like I said, I continue to be struck by how relatively brief a stint this was before Brainiac would be reinvented. But I think it's so effective. Now, at the same time, would I want that as the final form of Brainiac? Not necessarily. And like when we get to the one true Brainiac that we're kind of playing with now, he uses that robotic form, like those probes exist and he can command them. So that look, that aesthetic, that's still in play, and I'm happy for that. But I don't necessarily need that to be his sole final incarnation. But like I said, as far as like putting the pieces together, I mean, this is core here.
It will be interesting to see where he goes, where James Gunn takes him, where other writers take him. But I am a huge fan of the Jeff Johns version. And if that's the launch pad, and if some of these canon core fan loved elements are in there, which, James Gunn seems very, very much our steward of those. If he finds the right mix of what our on-screen Brainiac is and what he wants and what he can do, I think we're in for a great depiction.
Well said. Just to close us out here, there's the 1984 Wrath of Brainiac episode of Super Friends, where this new look Brainiac debuts on the small screen in animated form. He forges an alliance with Darkseid, and he has Darkseid power these android doppelgangers of Superman and Wonder Woman to trap other members of the Super Friends. Ultimately, it falls apart. Darkseid turns on him because, as audience members might recall, this Darkseid at this point in time on Super Friends is like real horned up for Wonder Woman. Just like Brainiac with Lois in Superman Reborn, or Brainiac with Supergirl in the unmade Superman 3. That was kind of his thing at the time. So it falls apart. But we got to see that Brainiac brought to life. And there's a great, like I took a screen grab of this, of the new look Brainiac kind of showing his old form on the computer screen. So like you see the two of them in the same shot. Really, really cool. And of course, again, we know the Superpowers line of action figures tying in with all of this, and really kind of brought it all together, I think, in cementing the look. And I have to imagine the cartoon, but more so the action figure, I think went such a long way towards really kind of cementing that look for the character in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, he came a long way from the Robin short pants that he started out with.
Yeah, and we talked about where Brainiac and the Luthor Brainiac team ends up here in whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. So I mean, that's Brainiac's pre-crisis journey. I had so much fun with the homework. I had even more fun talking about all of it with you. So really, thank you so much for joining me for the first episode of this year, kicking off this Brainiac event. I hope we did it justice. I hope for people who, if you love Brainiac, if you're a student of Brainiac, I hope that we did it justice and we were on the mark. And if you're kind of newer to the character and the history, and especially this part of the history, I hope that we laid it out in a way that was fun and informative and will kind of get you ready for this next incarnation of the character. And we'll all be watching to see kind of what the film pulls from. But thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I personally hope that they reveal a lot more about Krypton with the new on-screen adaptation, because, with the Supergirl movie we have, we're going to learn some more. And what we were saying before about, the humanity of Superman, and we're ultimately going to get to, I'm sure the humanity of Kara. But that's going to come to some sort of irresistible force, immovable object with Brainiac, and where does that humanity hit up against this cold version of Krypton versus what they both feel Krypton is. I think there's a lot that is possible, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to it. And just going through the history here, if there's a version of Brainiac that you like, it's out there.
Yeah, if nothing else, I think that's very true. And really, this is just the start of our Brainiac coverage. Next time, we're going to get into the post-crisis Milton Fine iteration. We'll also talk about Superman the Animated Series and this whole idea of Brainiac as Kryptonian AI. We'll continue to move forward. We'll talk about this one true Brainiac and how that has manifested in more recent years. So a lot more to come. Everyone should follow at Wearing the Cape on Instagram. Everyone should check out Daniel's reporting at dailyplanetdc.com. Anything specific that you want to call out to folks?
No, just keep listening. And we're so thankful that you are joining us this new year. And we hope that there's many more great conversations to come.
Absolutely. And you'll be back on the show before too long for some more pre-crisis talk. So everyone should stay tuned for your return appearance. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Can't wait for you to hear everything that we have on deck for 2026. Make sure you come back next time. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.